Hello, you're listening to Talking At a Slot. I'm Scott, and this week I've got a very special guest. It's
Dave.
Dave Kennedy, the man, yeah, the godfather of slot. He doesn't like me
Oh,
saying
no.
that.
I'm not the godfather of slot. The Ayatollah of rock and roll, maybe, but not the
Apparently,
godfather of slot.
I think we once I think you got elevated to being the Pope or something once,
Oh,
didn't you, when we
boy.
were talking about you?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's unfortunate.
I think
Truly
what it,
unfortunate.
yeah, no, no, what it is a kind of a recognition, if you like, and you know this, but for listeners' benefit, about a year ago when I've been watching you for a while, and I thought we haven't got this would be really good if we had a British version, something because at the time we didn't, and God bless you, you're in America and that's your biggest audience, and that's great, and you all drive on the wrong side and all that good stuff. So it
Well,
was a big part of the inspiration to get going. Uh, but one of the goodness to kick off, just to get you, if you like to get it's something I know your regular viewers will know your views on lots of things, and that you've worked in the industry, and it fascinates me that how you did that. How did you make the leap from one of the ordinary folk to being one of the very few folk who've ever worked for a slot car company?
so I was a photographer. I started shooting in about 1995 full time, and until about 2003 or 2002. No, 2000. Yeah, well, anyway. Um, my wife suggested that I needed a hobby. That I tend to be a person who's way too intense. You might not have noticed I get a little rattled about things. And she's like, yeah, you really need a hobby. And I thought, I could probably do trains because my family's always been into trains. And my uncle got me into slot cars when I was a little kid. But I kind of got out of it when my wife and I were moving around, and we accidentally kind of we went to Sears Point Raceway, which was near where we lived, near San Francisco, and we were getting a gift for my mother-in-law, and she my wife was going to go look at T-shirts or something at the place, and I said, well, I don't want to go look at T-shirts. And I looked over at the wall and I thought there were little models there. I said, I'll go look at the little models of the diecast or whatever they are. And it turned out they were slot cars. There was a whole wall full of Fly and Ninco and I think some scalextric at Sears Point Raceway at the real racing track. And I realized I walked up to the whole wall of cars and it was like a bolt of lightning literally hitting me. Holy crap, I could do slot cars as a hobby. And I went home and looked at them online and found them again in kind of the modern form. I had done them from about 5 or 6 or 4 really when my uncle got me into slot cars. But I had kind of gotten out of it because of moving a lot, as I said. And I found them online, and we moved back to the New York City area. And the paper that I got hired at in New York City area had a big studio, and I worked in the evenings, and I had time to enjoy playing in the studio if I wanted to or not. So I started taking slot cars into a real commercial studio at the newspaper and started taking photos of the cars just because I didn't really have a space to put up a track in the
No.
apartment we had. In the suburbs. So, and I didn't have the money, frankly, at that time either. I had just like maybe 2 cars, and I'd go to race them at my uncle's house in Connecticut on the weekends. And so I was kind of enjoying taking pictures of the cars as how I was enjoying the hobby, which is kind of how I do it now, frankly, too. Um, so, people enjoy the hobby in different ways, whether it's tuning or collecting or driving or racing or however you want to put it. And I happen to be one of these weirdos that was taking photos of them, I guess, as the way I was just enjoying them. And I got to be I was posting them on a forum. I won't, out of deference to Slot Forum, I won't mention which one here.
Other
But
forums are available, yeah.
it was it was an illustrated version of where you might find slot cars, you might say. And I was a moderator there, and I started taking more photos, and then I got to be the unofficial, or actually official, Ninco reviewer. So I got sent some samples that got me started thinking about reviews and doing them. I had a falling out with the person who owns the forum still, and I started my own blog just because, well, why not? Because I was a journalist and had been a journalist my entire life, basically. And I thought to myself, well, what basic name would sound most like a newspaper? And I thought of actually Slot Car Gazette and Slot Car Herald, and Slot Car News just seemed like it rolled off the tongue much more easily. So that's what I picked. I got a blogger website, slotcarnews.blogspot.com. I still own the website. I don't really post there anymore. There's a friend that posts there, but I started that in 2006, and I started showing product photos that people would send out. And really, at that time, nobody would kind of pull them all together on a regular basis. Sometimes there would be one or two people that would post them on Slot Forum or one of the other forums, and then manufacturers would kind of post them themselves, but it wasn't really like a thing to post the news as often as it came out. And because of who I was, being this very kind of type A news person, too intense about it, I thought, well, this is something that I can do, and it didn't cost me anything to do it. So it was that, because I didn't have to buy cars to do it. I was reposting the news that most of the time would go ignored because it would be posted on one forum and not another. I would be on Italian forums and Spanish forums all the time, trying to pick up news here and there. And then I wanted to kind of post every day to kind of fuel traffic, because with websites like that, with news, you need to kind of generate regular content to have people coming back. So I emailed real racing teams and brands. Like I emailed Red Bull and got their permission. As the websites say, can't use you can't use the content here without written permission of the people, descriptions, or accounts, blah, blah, blah. So I got written permission from Red Bull, from Porsche, from a number of Porsche teams, from a number of free news wire types of websites that had kind of generic news as well as car industry news. So I would kind of fill in, so to speak, on the days when I couldn't find any actual slot car news to post. I would fill in with real racing news, the idea, if I could, the idea being that the same people that would want to look at toy cars probably also care about real racing. And that's kind of how it started.
It's interesting. I mean, for those who've not listened to it, we did a piece where we look back on the formation of Slot Forum, which is about that same time. And I think obviously technology forum were easy to set up, and the people with the internet, in terms of imagery, I think it was really that and the speed of download, isn't it? I remember sitting in the office on dial-up watching, into Scale Model site, which is still going. The UK pictures would be downloading that, and you would get sort of a third of the way down and think, well, no, I don't want to see the rest of that, and then move on to the next one.
Yep, I've been there.
What it was like. That's what it was like, kids. So, but I think the technology just all kind of came together. And you're right. What the guys were saying on Slot Forum was trying to get the slot car manufacturers to even think about the benefit of sharing what they were doing. Some would, some wouldn't. As Gareth discovered, some of them would take things to a show and then say, don't take any pictures of it. It was kind of crazy. The understanding of what was going on was really big. So pulling something together like that, even now, it is not easy with because it's a collection of cottage industries, isn't it? There's no
Yeah.
none of these are big multinational companies with marketing departments who are really thinking about this every day of the week.
No, and also, I mean, like some of the companies, I mean, a lot of them, frankly, farm it out. Like I do a lot of the social media posting for Slot It and Polycar. They have people that could do it, but the woman that does it, who you probably know as well, Jocelyn, um, she's got a lot of other sales duties to do, and some of those people, most of them, frankly, are only part time, so they can't really do it as effectively as someone that can devote, a couple hours a week. Hey, you send me an email, I'll post it when I get the chance because it's probably 5 or 6 hours delayed in the email anyway. So I do that for Slot at Polycar. I've turned down a couple companies because I frankly just don't have the extra time. I do work for a U.S. distributor who's a retailer as well, but they're the Canadian distributor for NSR, LEB Hobbies. And it is a very small industry, and it's time consuming to post things, and it's time consuming to look for news.
Also,
But I
the
enjoy
quality.
doing it.
Yeah. I mean, the quality level is that's the anything you do online. It's easy to get started. That's
Yeah.
always the way. It's dead simple. Once you then start trying to raise a consistent level of quality, and regular listeners will, to Talking After Slot, will know we still struggle on that one. But I'm interested that so this is all you doing your own thing. How did you make the leap to working for? Who did you work for first? Was it Carrera first or
No, I
Hornby
worked
or
for SCX first. So how
XTX?
I
Yeah.
started this was I started my blog, Slot Car News, and I was very, I guess, insistent with SCX because it seemed like they were releasing a lot of cars at the time, which is probably about 2006. Well, 2006 when I started. They would send out regular newsletters, they called them newsletters. It was a PDF with usually 3 photos on the first page, a product description, and the second page of the PDF was another photo, and then a brief description of the whatevers. So it looked like to me, well, okay, they have a lot of content coming out. I'll email them. Someone emailed me back, an actual person it was Luca Porcelati, and he and I got chatting regularly, and I got closer with the company. They had decided, kind of unbeknownst to me at the time, that they were going to make a push into the U.S., and I was approached because I was doing what they called marketing, which I had no idea I was doing that. I was a journalist, not a business major. I never took one business class ever.
Mm.
And they approached me and said, this is probably around 2007, right before iHobby in Chicago. They said, well, we want you to come to Chicago. We'll pay for your trip so you can talk about what we have here. I said, okay, great. And I went, and they made me an offer to consult. And I said, well, I don't know what I'm doing with any of this. I just take photos and show them online. And the guy who became my boss, Chuck Arid, said, well, that's called marketing, Dave. And I said, are you sure? This seems a little too easy to be what people call marketing. And he said, no, we're going to make you an offer. It wasn't a great offer, but then a couple months later, they made me an actual offer. And it was a step up from what I was making at the newspaper. I could work from home because of the fact that it was a Spanish company. It didn't matter where I lived. So my wife and I moved from the New York City area to where we live now, which is where she grew up in Pennsylvania. And so that was 2008, I think. I started working full-time for SCX, and I worked full-time for them for 2 years. And that was the start of it. So there we are.
That's fantastic. I mean, there's a lot. I mean, I think people may know my career was always in full-size cars for
Yep.
different car companies. And I think you get people who are fans of a product or a hobby or whatever. It's always kind of hard for them to conceive the company behind the doing all of this and the sort of making that leap. Now, my big thing was I always wanted to work for BMW, and eventually I got to work for BMW.
Wow, that's cool.
It wasn't as great as I thought it was going to be.
Of course not. Of course it isn't. That's what you learn.
That's what you learn. I'm slightly leading you down a path there, but with that,
yeah. Well, feel free because I have lots to say about that.
Well, bearing in mind that we don't have a legal department.
Yeah, exactly. That's okay.
But if we did have a merch department, I would be getting them to do T-shirts which said "That's called marketing, Dave," because I think that would definitely.
I should actually add that to.
Yeah, that's called marketing, Dave. Yeah, definitely.
That was literally what he said to me, by the way. Okay, I'm doing business. All right.
So obviously for the sound of it, so although you'd sort of had sets as a kid, it's been relatively recently since you got back into it as an adult.
It was about 2001.
Yeah. So how did you?
During the summers. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, how did it feel? So once you're inside the tent, to use a well-known metaphor, how did that feel?
It felt surreal, frankly, because one of the first things I did was, I guess I went to Toy Fair in Germany fairly soon after being hired by SCX just to kind of get a sense of things. And then I went to Spain, which was crazy. I had been an exchange student in Germany for a long, not really a true exchange, but a long vacation, basically a long trip into a couple months or a couple weeks rather. Anyway, so it wasn't the first time I was in Europe, but it still felt very strange to be traveling because of toy cars and having an expense budget and being put up in a fairly nice hotel and flying anywhere. I mean, it was, I had to pinch myself because you feel like a fraud. It's like, what the hell? Why am I here? I'm just taking photos and then, a few thousand people see them online, but it was very, very weird. And frankly, still is to me but then I had one of those jobs where I was taking pictures in New York City of pro sports and San Francisco of pro sports. So I already kind of had one of those jobs where people would say, oh, wow, you get to see this or that in Madison Square Garden or wherever. And yes, I did. So it being on the inside of a company, first of all, it was a massive wake up about how few people are actually in the business, are in an office doing the thing, whatever the thing is. Shockingly, they didn't really play with the cars, which I don't know why I thought was surprised by that, but nearly no one that works at these companies, that works at the large companies, I should say, not the hobbyist ones. Nearly no one that works at the larger companies, Carrera and Scalextric, actually ever really play with the cars. Now, they might test them if they're a design person, but these are not people that are hobbyists. By and large, I knew of no one at Carrera that raced when I worked there. I worked there for 8 years.
Yeah, it's not that. I mean, I worked for 4 or 5 different car companies, and I spent 25 years at the world's biggest one, and very few of the people there were car fans. They liked a nice car, but they weren't car fans, and it just wasn't part of what life was about. And I'm not, in a way, I'm not surprised. I guess once it gets beyond being that kind of self-made hobbyist company where somebody transcends the they're interested in the hobby to making their own product, and you can see how that may work. Once it's a business that's maybe generations old, I mean, Carrera and Hornby, pretty old businesses. They've been going a long time, and
Yeah.
I mean
And
SCX,
SCX as well. They're still owned
yeah,
by the Arnow family, even
yeah,
even today. Luis still owns, and his family, and Luis Carreras, his son, still run SCX. So I mean, yes, certainly family run. Scalextric is as has been talked about ad nauseum, corporate run for it's like they have a turnover pretty regularly at the top, and have had recently. The new folks there are great. I met them in at Toy Fair in New York. So yeah, but
yeah.
the thing that shocked me, I think, was that I could operate, that I could work effectively without knowing much about business, because a lot of it was just kind of, what do people like? What do they want to buy? How much do they want to pay for it? For dealers, it's how much do they have to pay for it, and when does it ship, and how big a box does it come in? They don't really care as much, most of them, about what a thing is, what the colors are. They want to know how much it costs and when you're shipping it. That's 90% of what dealers want to know. 90% of what consumers want to know is, how much does it cost and what livery is it? And also that goes with what car it is. But they don't care about the rest of it. Sort
Yeah,
of.
I mean, again, like that echoes. I mean, car dealers are very seldom car fans. They're money fans.
Yeah.
they like they like
Oh,
they
yeah.
like making money. They run a business, and it's probably. I mean, I think probably the fastest way to lose money is to run a business that's your passion, and because you'll not make the right decision. So
Yeah.
when you joined, what was kind of the lineup then? What were just to paint a picture? What were SCX selling, and what were they about to sell? What kind of
So when I joined, that was so one of the things they were talking about doing was starting a line of Trans Am cars, because the Trans Am stuff at the time was, the overwhelming favorite that scalextric was doing, and that was, like I said, about 2007, 2008. So that was the heyday of the Boss 302 and the Camaro Trans Am cars that were sort of fairly new molds at the time, and everyone wanted to jump on the bandwagon. Well, everyone except Carrera, quite frankly. So basically, that left SCX. I said, well, rather than doing the same car that scalextric is doing, let's do something else. Let's do the next obvious car, which was the CUDA. And I researched the CUDA. I have all of them kind of behind the you can't see, but it's behind the camera here. All of the cars all of the SCX CUDAs that I have, which is probably 90% of them. So I researched the CUDAs for them, and that took about 6 months to get kind of more. It was harder at the time to look for images on Google, which was how I did most of the search, because I lived in Connecticut at the time, and I couldn't, I don't live in Southern California or the Seattle area, which is where the real CUDAs are by and large. The ones that do the Trans Am series. Anyway, so it was hard to kind of research them and kind of figure out what to do. But that's how they started, and at the same time they were also going to be doing the NASCARs, the aero body NASCAR, the long kind of pointy nose. I think I have one here.
Was that
somewhere.
yeah? Were they planning that before you joined, or was that one of your? Because it's sort of an obvious American connection, was it?
I honestly don't remember if that was prior. I mean, it was right around the time I joined. It was something they knew they needed to do. It wasn't, like my doing. They had they had Chuck here, and they had Brian Young, who was already working for them. He had been hired a couple weeks before me, full time as well, when I got hired. So I mean, the idea was there to do them for sure. And then we started doing them around the time I got hired. and they were quite successful. The cars were they performed quite well, and they were pretty nice models. They had a reasonable range of decorations on them. They spent quite a bit of money on that. I got to learn quickly about kind of licensing and what went into the discussions with NASCAR, which is the top level of licensed kinds of people. When you think about licensing in the slot car world, you think about NASCAR, you think about Ferrari, pretty much as the difficult ones to deal with, or the ones that require the most. I don't want to say difficult because they want to do projects, but they make it. They have a lot of requirements, which I think is fine. So
yeah, I mean, it's that. I always say to people, it's a measure.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's a measure of the value of the license, isn't it? Because these the bureaucracy that surrounds something like NASCAR or the Olympics or whatever, and I had a little bit of a taste of that in my career.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense.
It's painful because it's so big, and they have to guard against. There's money involved, not necessarily for the sport or for the licensee in terms of the size of it, but somebody might make a lot of money, so they have to control it. And also, I think what people tend to forget about, particularly with toys, is product liability. They have to. These companies can't afford the risk of some little toy company making something in China that kids then choke on or whatever. And so there's a whole load of good reasons why these things are pure product. But I think people outside business and certainly outside the hobby, it would always be that, well, just go and make that model. Just go and do it. Well, it's not that easy.
Right, and I do think there's people have a odd understanding of it's like if you're building something, if you're working on a project and you emotionally invest in that and it's your job or it's a passion for you and you invest years and years and years of time into it, and I'm going somewhere with this, you want to have ownership of that, big O and small o ownership of it. And if someone takes that from you, if someone uses that without your permission, or at least asking your permission, then it's insulting. And I've seen this with the brand that I use, Slot Car News, since 2006, and I don't want to go too deeply into this, but I know that it's a description of showing news from the slot car world, but it's also my brand. And there's a YouTuber or two that uses my brand on title slides. And of course it's annoying because it feels like there's a confusion about, oh, is Dave on that stream? Oh, well, no, but why does it say Slot Car News? And I've used this and I've built this. I have domains that I've paid for since 2006. It's been something that I've invested my time in. And another streamer started screaming about me, calling me all kinds of names about why would I do this. But I do this as a small business for my family too. I intend to do this even after I retire, which hopefully will be in the next 10 years, maybe after 10 years. But
I can tell you, it's really good being retired.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. But my point
really
is, it's a small business for me. It's something that I've invested. Not the money investment isn't really the thing. It's the emotional investment. It's the time investment.
Exactly, and I think it's not. But again, even if people are doing it in all innocence, and I'm not saying they are or they aren't, because again, going back to with you making models of cars, there's a sort of notion that stuff's free on the internet, and
Right.
we're all in. You just do this. People forget that everything takes the fact that they've heard of something or are aware of something means that some effort has gone into it. It wasn't just lying there in the street, and but I think. Again, it's an echo of the theme, if you like. Most people are not exposed to business like that, and when they do,
Right.
they come against, they go, well, this all feels a bit, serious. Well, yes, it is. And I think that, again, it's a crazy. I mean, all I'd say is I think you, and I know you're not blowing smoke up your what's it. You are definitely at the kind of the peak of the pyramid in terms of slot car media. And I guess that there's a kind of inverted compliment comes along the way when people try and take some of that one way or another, whether it's do the same thing or trying to. So my view would be look at it as a kind of sign of success, really. But I get this. It's annoying. What about going back to
Yeah,
the toy cars though? So
sure.
how did it feel? How did it feel when? So I guess the CUDA was the first model that you were involved in the development of. How
Yep.
did it feel when you went into a slot shop, metaphorically, and there was the car you'd worked on? I think. What was that like?
Um, it was really emotional because growing up as a kid, I played with slot cars with my uncle. And I mean, it means toys have always meant a lot to me. My family are all collectors. And my uncle got me into model building when I was little, mainly with Airfix stuff. My grandparents would visit England all the time and bring me back stuff from Hamleys, and brought me back some Corgi die casts, and like kind of raising toys up on a pedestal as my family did. It was shocking, humbling, emotional, just to feel like I've had an effect on the hobby with seeing those first two cars. They were the Dan Gurney and the Sweet Savage Cudas. I mean, I'll be honest, I cried when I saw the first, like, this is what I helped get done. And it meant a tremendous amount. And it still does. Every time there's a car that I've researched that comes out, there's obviously a lot of people that work on cars. It's not just one person that gets a car done, but most of what I've done is kind of followed trends and followed what people want. And I have kind of a mental checklist about kind of what cars people want and what decorations they want. And that's something I've always paid attention to. So a lot of the contributions that I've made have been in that way. It's kind of initiating the project because I've never been in the actual offices every day to get the project actually complete. So my work is kind of at the beginning and the end of the project. It's kind of researching it, finding it, convincing people to make it, which is not a small undertaking. And then you kind of shepherd it through, hopefully better than worse, about the project, make sure that the details get put on the car correctly, the color is correct, the driver's name is correct. Sometimes I'd get involved with licensing negotiations with the drivers or the teams or the real racing company. And then when the car is ready to come out, I'd get samples, and then I'd take the product photos. So, and then, talk to people about the story of the car, how the slot car got made, any information I have about the real car that people might not know or that people do know. So it's kind of the whole process, but not, again, unfortunately, because I've never had the privilege of working in an office of a slot car company regularly. I've almost always worked from home, and frankly, from right here at this desk most of the time. So it's incredibly satisfying to have some kind of small effect on the hobby when you're suggesting a car, and then to have that car come out and have it be successful. I mean, the CUDA is arguably the most successful car SCX have certainly ever had in the modern era. They haven't released any other mold with so many different liveries. I mean, there's 18 or 20 different CUDAs up here or that have been available. They haven't done any number of any other car with just that one livery. in the modern era since about 2000. So
Yeah, although given that they've just re-released the BMW M1, there's
oh,
hope that everything.
boy, I get that, and I know you kind of come at the hobby from really loving the older molds, but for me, it's I was kind of absent from the hobby for a lot of those years, from the 80s and 90s, because frankly, slot cars just about died here in the U.S. and they were nearly impossible to find, especially where I've lived most of my life. So, I didn't have the benefit of having that kind of continuum of cars. I started with the old stuff from the 60s that my uncle has, and we raced on his Revell track. And they were all scratch-built cars. They weren't really RTR cars in the 60s. There were kits and there were models, and that's it. And that's how I started out. So, all of the cars that I drove were his that he made in the 60s. And they were all, 25th scale and some 32nd scale, but a lot of jalopies and stuff. And
yeah, it's probably a little anecdote. I may have told you this one before. I was on a work event once, and I had three. So there was two journalists and I sitting having a chat. All three of us slot car fans. One of them, a guy called Richard Bremner, who works for Car Magazine, I think. He collected sort of what you might call that 60s era scalextric stuff. And the sort of epitome of what he had a set of, I think it was 6 Formula Juniors, still in the branded paper wrapper that they came from the factory to the distributor. And he didn't want to break into that paper because it would spoil it. So he knew it was inside, but he didn't want to do it. The other guy built his own brass chassis, wound his motors, all that stuff, did all that kind of thing. And there was me who bought toy cars, took them out of the box, and put them on the track and played with them. And there was three of us with a fairly niche hobby to start off with, completely different in how we approached it. It was there was no real crossover other than the fact that these things all went in a slot. And I think it depends on where you started, and you mentioned your uncle, and I think it depends where you start, maybe which club you go to or something that gets you into a certain way of that's how you do slot cars. And there's no right or wrong as long as you're having fun. That's the key thing. As long as you're having fun.
Oh, totally.
People need to remember the fun bit a bit more often. I think that's right.
Yeah, I think so. People take, and I get it's that part of my personality, the negative part of my personality. I get negative about things, and I do try to work on it. It's definitely something that's gotten better and worse. And, certainly at the beginning of the pandemic, when I lost my job with scalextric, that was just absolutely crushing. And I cried for a day and a half, basically. And certainly that's when I decided to kind of start doing slot car news again, because I had nothing to do, frankly. And, we were just obviously sitting at home with nothing to do. Everybody was. And I thought, well, I don't really want to be like that a-hole guy that goes and trashes everybody that he just worked with. But I also had some insight into the business, and I wanted to speak plainly for the first time in more than a decade of having worked with companies. And certainly I was extremely depressed, clinically so. And I worked through a lot that summer, those first few videos, which are, frankly, very negative. Not wrong, but negative. And anyway, it's just, it is people that work at these companies. And yes, we are hobbyists and we take these things probably too seriously, and they might not take them as seriously as we do. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? That's how it is. But we're true believers in what we do in the hobby, and we love it, and we want it to be perfect. which of course it never will be. We want all the cars to be perfect. We want them to cost nothing, and we want them on our doorstep the day after they're announced. And none of that will happen. And they're made by people that may or may not care about our likes and dislikes. And we do need to remember that, that these are toys. They are meant for kids. They really are at the end of the day.
Yeah, I'm good. This is why you've touched on something. I've never really said this out loud before. To me, it's a lot like Star Wars, but I mean Star Wars pre-Disney. Won't go to that one. So when the prequels came out, and everybody was giving them a hard time because there was a whole generation who had kind of that first three films revolutionized blockbusters, would bought all the toys, all that sort of stuff.
Yep.
And there was so much anticipation, and and I remember George Lucas sort of saying they are kids' films,
Yeah,
for kids, and there was all these adults going, it's not as good. But equally, and I see this in line with there was an interview. I think it was a UK TV one, but it was Ewan McGregor before the third of the prequels. Forgive me, I forget the names of them these days. But anyway, the third one.
it's okay.
And of course, it was sort of everybody was kind of knew that there'd just been that sense of it's not quite right. And even Ewan McGregor being interviewed, he just kind of said, "Come on, George, you can do it," So there was this sense of even the guy starring in it was kind of like willing the director.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same. We all the negativity that people. I think maybe I'm being kind. The negativity that people give over about the cars if they're disappointed in them is rooted in an expectation that it's going to be better, and therefore it's not that they're, I don't think, out to have a go, because why would you do that? I think it's they want to be able to go, this thing's great, but they, for whatever reason, they find they can't. And I know what from, I think I say my career was, if you like, the opposite end of the journalism spectrum from you, because I was in PR all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody sets out to make a bad movie. Nobody sets out to make a bad car.
Right.
Nobody sets out to make a bad slot car. It just doesn't sit. So it's about how close you get to the thing. But equally, we were spending our money, and you can always choose not to buy it. And that's been an interesting situation for this. Again, not that having said all of that, be positive stuff, I'm going to sound negative. So take the JPS Lotus 79, pre-ordered the set. When the minute they announced it, I'm having that with the Brabham with the fan. Been looking forward to it. So that was 10 months ago, and got a call from the store saying, it's ready. Do you want to pick it up? I went, yeah, I don't want it. I've seen pictures of it. The livery's not really good, and Mario's head is far too big. So, and it was an interesting moment for me, where instead of just going, yeah, I want this, and then maybe be disappointed when I got it, that I had sort of stemmed enough of that enthusiasm to go, nah, it isn't quite good enough. Now, I'm going to counter that straight away by saying, equally, scalextric's Escort, the Repsol WRC one, wasn't on my list to buy. Saw it on a shelf, had to have it. I love that car. I think it's great. It's a great slot car model because it looks right, goes well, all that. It's not going to win any races, but it's great fun just to stand there doing lap after lap after lap after lap.
Oh yeah,
and so I mean, it's not me having a downer on scalextric about the Lotus, but I think that's where so there's an element of, I think, well, our expectations are whatever they might be, and we just want them. We're Ewan McGregor going, come on, George, you can do it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's the thing that, I mean, people that work at these companies, I mean, you put a lot into the work. I put months into the CUDA. And like I said, I wasn't even in an office doing the day-to-day, having a meeting with this or that person. I would, I do anyway. I put a lot of time and emotion and investment and, literally lay awake at night before some of these cars get released. Like, we're going live tomorrow, or, it's going to be shown in Toy Fair tomorrow or whatever. And you're dying inside because you really want it to be great. Now, maybe I'm the exception, but I don't think so. I mean, nobody wants to do shit. or sorry, shite. Nobody wants to do a bad job and to be thought of poorly. I mean, literally nobody wants that. Could more time and care be put into certain cars? Yes, but at the same time, it's hard to look at a range of cars and think to yourself, well, how can this one car be so delectable? How can this one car have everything right about it? Every curve, by and large, like all this fabulous little detail on a car, and then have car B be so lumpen and crappy, made by the same company. And you think to yourself, well, mother of God, how can these two things exist? This doesn't make any sense. You clearly didn't put as much time into one as you did the other. And that's insulting to the people that wanted that other one to be good. And more often than not, quite frankly, the U.S. stuff has gotten the short end of the stick. And that's something that I don't think people haven't really talked about as much, about that fine point of, well, all these rally cars get made. Well, I mean, all the stuff, there's so much effort that gets put into this rally stuff and the touring cars and all the stuff that's just never going to sell in the U.S. because it won't. And then the GT cars sell here, which is great. But, the U.S. stuff, it's been a varying degree of quality, of build quality, of mold quality, of all the quality. The research quality, which sometimes had been falling on me, not doing a good job, or other people not doing a good job. And then the designers not doing a great job, the wrong materials chosen, the wrong motors get put into cars, which was infamous at SCX. They just decided to put the slow motor in the NASCARs in the middle of the run for no freaking reason at all, and then lied to me about it. And then it was a disaster. But so, it's like there's a lot of that was the other thing that kind of surprised me, was there's a lot of nonsense in the business. And you think to yourself, well, God, why even bother if you're going to do such a crap job? And you kind of know you're doing a crap job when you're giving one end the short end of the stick. Like, how do you not realize you're doing this? So I don't know. That gets back to what you were saying about some people getting really wound up, about it just falls short of the expectation.
Yeah, I think it's a sign that we can't. I mean, state really obvious. We're going to spend, £50 on $50 on a toy car with Kia, and that's a cheap one these days. But it's more than that. I think. I think people are passionate about it, but people are passionate about movies, music. All this, and that's what it taps into. And I think for the businesses who are involved, big or small, I think if they don't recognise that, that's what they're selling. They're trying to fulfil some element of that dream that we've got. And I mean, looping back and conscious of time, we're going to have to do this again, aren't we? Conscious
Absolutely,
of time, for the one of the photography side of it and the imagery side of it. I've long held a theory on toy cars or assembly kits or whatever, that there's imagery that we've seen that has an effect on us, and it's our desire to kind of recreate that in front of us.
Yeah.
I always, I'll build a model of an aircraft, and subconsciously I end up holding it in the same angle as it was in a movie, or it was in a book or something. And I think when I go back, I spend hours, literally, this is what the benefit of being retired, I spend hours literally just playing with toy cars. And people say, well, aren't you racing them? And I went, no, I'm watching them. I'm driving it, but I'm watching it go round. And I think it's one of the unique, this is where it's different from die-cast. It's possibly similar to RC, but I don't think RC isn't realistic enough.
Yeah,
I think
it's closer to trains, I'd say.
Yeah, so it's that bit about where you can recreate something you've seen, whether that's on TV in real life, even if you're just trying to bring a picture to life. And that's where the joy comes. And as I say, if I can take a car, it doesn't have to be the fastest car, as long as it goes round the track and I can slide it round the corners a little bit. I'm having a lot of fun sometimes.
Yeah, I think it's that connection, and if you're really drawn to a car or a brand, it's a way of making it personal for you, especially if you'll never really own a real Porsche, and let's face it, most of us never will. Um, it's having that little bit of personal something in your home. It's like holding it in your hand, having a Cuda, in your hand, or a Cobra in your hand. And so, it's like it's having those things, and it's funny because I've talked with real I know real race car drivers. I'm sure you do too. And you talk with them about slot car racing. Frankly, a lot of them know about slot car racing, especially the European folks. And there's a connection that you can make there. Yes, even about the slot cars. And I've researched the slot cars because of the real cars. So I know a fair amount, more than the average person probably, about certain types of racing histories of cars, certain cars. So, I would go to trade shows, or we would go meet with real Porsche teams. We did this in Carrera quite a bit, meeting with real teams. And I could talk real car with them at a respectable level, even the engineers. And my boss at Carrera at the time would show me off about that. He would say, just kind of go. And it built credibility with the Porsche team. We talked with the TRG, the racing group, Kevin Buckler, who was a Le Mans winner. And we were talking about doing some events with them and some work with them. And they had because they were a Porsche sponsored team, they had a real Porsche engineer there, or real engineer. I mean, an actual engineer from Porsche is what I meant. And being able to really talk with the guy intelligently, he was surprised that I knew as much as I did, because I don't think he was expecting much talking to the toy car people. But it's nice to have the connection with the real car, and have it, even if it's only a toy car, that's okay.
Yeah, it's part of the spirit of it, and I think that cars are it may well be a 20th century phenomenon that historians will look back on, but it's such a big part of our culture. Certainly in the West, however we define that these days. Mm-hmm. The car provided so much for people. In terms of freedom, mobility, all that sort. You could live somewhere else, you could work somewhere else, you could go places just because you wanted to. This was, sure. I think when we lose that, people are so the connection. The engineers I always found with the journalists, the best one, and this echo the same thing. The ones who went up to the engineer and said, "Oh yeah, that such and such is not very good, is it?" The engineer would just sort of roll his eyes and be polite for the next one. Somebody who went up and said, "What have you got in the garage?" Because you would find the chief engineer of Corolla almost invariably had a 911 somewhere in the garage.
That's awesome.
So it wasn't that they were they might have made a product which was fit for its purpose. It didn't mean they were sort of they really wanted to make washing machines or something. I mean, even Camry chief engineer, to use I should use a US reference, so Camry.
Sure.
Once described by somebody as a domestic appliance, but by God, what a domestic appliance!
Of course,
go anywhere, go forever.
So someone, my boss at the time when I was at SCX, I had gotten an offer from Carrera to move to Carrera, and he said, "Well, and at the time we were doing the SCX Pro cars, which were an all out and out hobbyist race car, and Carrera's stuff, especially at the time." Was just thought of as purely a toy. And my boss said, "Well, how are you going to go work for Carrera? These are not at all hobbyist quality cars." And I said, "Yeah, but they're toy cars. They get people into the slot car hobby, hopefully. And that's a great thing. And maybe I can, do some fun work with them. But it's that kind of, you're going to work on the inside and you change what you can change, which frankly isn't much. You can try to influence and kind of get a trend going somewhere. And, you're going into a company that you're working for. Don't expect to change anything. You can maybe change some minds. You can maybe influence, guide a little bit. If you're lucky, you do get to change something and add something to what they do. But, you're going into it with the wrong mindset. So just doing the best job you can and make the best toy you can is how I had always looked at it, especially with the SCX, Carrera, and Scalextric. These are toys. They're meant to be enjoyed by the broadest possible audience. And that's their reason for being. So,
yeah, that's good. We probably should wind up because we're nearly at an hour. As you and I said, we can both talk for too long. But anyway,
we can.
So before I let you go for now, because I hope you will come back and we'll do another one.
Oh, definitely.
There's a trick off the cuff question. So, you get a phone call as soon as we finish here. You get a phone call from major slot car brand. Doesn't matter which one.
Yep.
And they say, Dave, we've got a chance to make a car and announce it for the new year. What would be top of your mind? What's the slot car you'd love to see them make?
Well, I can tell you one that I think one is making because I suggested it to them. Is that
okay. I'll give you that one, but you've still got to tell me one that you don't think's been made.
That I don't think has been made. The Trans Am Pontiac Firebird, I do think has some legs. I also think a Cobra Daytona Coupe, which was made but kind of abandoned by Ravellogram, I think needs to be made well and again. And I would love to see it in 1/24th scale, although I don't think anyone would ever do that. But I would like to see somebody make the Cobra Daytona Coupe again, because it's one of my favorite cars ever. There we
are. Well, there you go. Hopefully, because they must be listening. It's you and me. If they're not listening, the fools. If they're not listening, free consultancy. Anyway.
Exactly. All this knowledge,
listen,
all this
knowledge,
all this shite, all in one place.
They're the utter slot.
Slot. That's sorry. Yeah, talking utter slot. My channel, we talk utter something else.
Brilliant, Dave. Listen, thank you very much. I really enjoyed that, and as I'll hopefully we'll do it again sometime soon.
Yeah.
But until then, keep well, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks.